How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Deciduous Bonsai Podcast. You're either streaming this via RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai channel on YouTube, or you are listening to this on the Bonsai Wire. Wherever you're catching up with us, welcome. I'm Andrew Robson. I'm a deciduous bonsai professional here in Portland, Oregon, and I have with me one of my really great friends, great students, and great volunteers, Maciek.
Hello, hello.
Maciek, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
This is episode number 1.
001.
001. And we're starting this podcast because you often are here volunteering in the garden, and we have really interesting conversations while we're slogging away at trees.
Yep.
And
can't shut up about it. Can't stop talking about it.
Can't stop talking about it. And we decided to share those conversations with all of you via this podcast and video platform. So...
yeah, lots of itchy questions at the back of my brain constantly as we're working on trees.
Yeah, and you're a lot newer to bonsai than I am. I've been doing this for over 15 years. How long have you been in bonsai?
Oh, probably no more than 6 or 7, I would say.
6 or 7 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you are a moderator on the bonsai subreddit.
Yep. Yeah, and the subreddit is a really good place to see how the average person collides with bonsai, what questions they have. And I find that actually a lot of those people have the same questions that I do.
Yeah. And
even this many years in, the day one questions that they have are often the same questions that I still have. So
yeah, and so our goal for this podcast is that we help decipher a lot of those questions. We help answer those in a way that's accessible and kind of helps you at home in all of your bonsai practices. So our topic for today is a topic that you see a lot on Reddit, do you not?
Yep, I do, yeah. The question that always comes up is, how do we actually get good at bonsai?
How do you get good at bonsai?
And more recently, and if you're out there, you probably know who you are, a person asked it in a really good way. They asked, is there an innate talent to this? Or is there something else? And the reason they asked this was in their local club, they found that their own skills, less than 1 year in, were not progressing as fast as they expected. Mm-hmm. And they were also seeing that a lot of their club members were not necessarily that great at bonsai yet and may never get to show trees.
Yeah.
Show level trees, as we call them. And meanwhile, there's a much younger, much more recent member of the club who has only been in bonsai for maybe 3 or 4 years or something like that. And they're already just rocketing ahead, making plans to go to Japan, crushing it, and they have really beautiful trees already. And they were wondering, is this elite material selection? Is it just talent? Is it innate? Is it skill building? Like, what is it? Where does it come from? I don't know if we can answer this in one single episode. But
we definitely can't answer this in one single episode.
But I feel like this is a good stone to keep hacking away at.
This is something that we'll probably talk about in every episode over the course of this podcast throughout time.
I would say also, just being a student here, that it kind of feels like one of the founding questions of the workshop here, at least from the student perspective.
Yeah, in our intensives here at RAKUYO, that is my goal for students. I want to help them get as good as they want to be. And that's probably one thing that we should start off by talking about is that there are different levels of good, and not everybody wants to necessarily do what it takes to or invest as much time, money, resources, energy into being at the highest level.
Yeah. I find often actually that when I'm helping people online with questions about bonsai, usually just introductory questions, I often have to pause and kind of think to myself, what is this person's idea of bonsai? Like, where are they headed with it?
Everybody comes with a different perspective.
Yeah, are they thirsty for that super high level? Do they want to just have an enjoyable hobby to kind of pluck away at over the years? And there's a huge difference in what you should strive for and what you should immediately do if you think you might be right for the exhibition level stuff.
Yeah, and you talked about that club analogy from the example on Reddit. You know, there's like, if we look at a typical bonsai club, there's maybe those 1 or 2 or 3 people that are regularly submitting trees to the U.S. National Show, the Pacific Bonsai Expo, who are doing it at like a more national level, then you
Right.
have a lot of people, and I even have a lot of students that are like this, that, they just want something to do to get them off the couch, to get outside, to, have a pair of scissors in one hand, a glass of wine or a beer in the other
Yeah.
hand, and
Yeah.
just like enjoy kind of doing something with their hands.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Not every cyclist goes to the Tour de France.
Yeah, not every
know.
tennis player needs to be an Olympian.
Right. What's interesting, though, is I do think that a lot of regular practitioners, if they knew kind of what I know through my eyes, if they had seen how quickly a beginner can turn into really competent,
Yeah,
then they would actually aim higher.
yeah.
And so I love when I see questions like that on Reddit, because it tells me there are people out there who are like, maybe I could do this. Maybe I can actually hope for that result. Because I can see that another person who's just as young as me, who just got started, they managed to get there pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so I hope that your answer for that person's question is that it's not innate. Maybe there is some innateness at the highest level,
I don't think it's innate, because
but I think there's a craft that you can learn.
I don't think it's innate, because well, at least in my specific scenario, I started doing bonsai in middle school, and up until I did a bonsai apprenticeship, I was doing this at a very different level, at a very different scope. I mean, my passion was still there,
Right.
but I was doing it at a very different level than obviously after the apprenticeship.
If you had a time machine,
Uh-huh.
and you knew that the distant past self, your teenage self, was going to listen to, mid-30s self,
Yeah.
what would you tell yourself back then of how to change your goals, what to immediately do differently?
Yeah.
Would you change anything?
I don't think I would change much. Doing bonsai at a very high level is a lifestyle, and your whole life has to move around it. And there's just a lot of people, if you have a young family, if you have a really demanding career outside of bonsai, if you have a lot of these kind of roadblocks, it might prevent you from going down the high-level bonsai highway.
Yeah.
And I kind of had that too. I was a classical musician. I was playing at a really high level, and I didn't even have the time. I had the passion to think about bonsai, but I didn't have the time to invest. I didn't really haven't build the techniques that I needed to do it.
Yeah, this reminds me that sometimes I read questions online of people trying to get something pretty ambitious done with bonsai, but
Yeah.
they'll mention something offhandedly like, I go on long vacations every summer, and my heart sinks a little bit because I know, what it's actually going to take to
Yeah.
get through this, either as a student or even as a
Yeah.
seasoned practitioner, that you're really going to have to close all those
Yeah.
gaps.
Yeah, let's just say this right out the back. Doing bonsai at the highest level does not mean doing bonsai casually.
Right.
It's a lot of work, a lot of investment in time.
How big do you think that portion of the bonsai hobbyist field can hope to put trees in exhibitions that they are proud of, that other people can look at and say, it's not AAA, it's not S tier,
Yeah.
but it's up there.
No, I think everybody exhibiting, I think, is one of the best ways to excel at bonsai quickly. If you are training a tree for exhibit, if you are gearing it up for a show, you will see that tree improve at 100 miles an hour versus if it was just on your bench and you weren't planning for that exhibit, it might be just 50 miles an hour.
Right.
It's like if you're training for a marathon, you're obviously going to run with a lot more intention than if you just go on a casual jog, because it's too.
Yeah, if you're wearing the bib,
Yeah.
and the music is blaring and everyone's getting going, and
Yeah.
it's like a group run or a group ride. You tend to have more momentum. You tend to have more stamina when you're
Yeah.
in that group. Kind of like birds flying south
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
winter. They have that
Yeah.
group momentum.
Yeah. And so I think, going back to our original question, how do you do bonsai? How to do bonsai better? How to be good at bonsai? I think one of the ways is define what good means to you. Good, what it means to me is making the best deciduous trees in the world, period. I don't want to just be the best in North America. I want to be the best anywhere. And it's not just I'm the best, it's I want that to be manifested in the trees that I produce. I want to maintain, the best Japanese maples, the best beeches, the best hornbeams.
Yep.
And regardless of where that is. For some people, and for most people, I should say, they just want to have their tree look nice in the club show.
Yeah.
And that's a very worthy
I think
goal.
that's very achievable too.
That's achievable. A level up from that might be being, taking trees to regional shows,
Yep.
going to your local ABS convention, going to your local, Golden State Bonsai Federation convention, showing your trees there. A level up from that is participating in the U.S. National Show, the Pacific Bonsai Expo. A level up from that is being competitive in any of those things. So just getting into the expo is different than trying to be a prize contender. And
Do you think that most of the skills and educational experiences and material selection processes and social aspects, do you think that the overlap between the regional presenting intermediate bonsai artists, do you think there's overlap between what they have to do to get there and what somebody has to do to get to the top level where you're at, say?
I think so. I think there is overlap. You mentioned material selection. I think that's one of the biggest variables to meeting your goals in bonsai. If your goal is to have every tree in your collection be something that could get into the U.S. National Show, get into the Pacific Bonsai Expo, that means you might have to be making some hard choices, looking at your collection and saying, well, this really doesn't make the cut.
Right.
Versus if your goal is club shows, then with material selection, you might have a tree that looks great in a club show that's not quite ready to go to the national show. And it might not ever be. That's the thing about bonsai is the older they get, the more the quality is kind of locked in. If I give you a Japanese maple seedling, that tree has infinite potential. That Japanese maple seedling could be the best Japanese maple in the world that's ever been made.
If you hit when the iron is hot every time, season after season.
Right. If you do all the right things,
Yeah.
if you build your life around that, if you have the skill to back all of that up.
Yeah. Well, this
you
kind
get
of
some luck too.
This kind of brings an interesting thought to my head, which is that there's kind of this like 6 or 7 years in, but intending to become serious kind of hangover that happens, which is you're looking at your whole collection, and your whole collection is mostly that first few years of your work.
Yeah.
And you're just like, where do I go from here? I have all these trees. I'm sure there's tons of people listening that have this issue, right? Where they have the 200, 300 trees or 150 trees or whatever.
Yeah.
And they need to turn it all around and focus and
Yeah.
really like turn this into something good.
I was that person. When I started my apprenticeship, Michael had a really, really tough conversation with me, Michael Hagedorn. He said, you have only a few good trees. These are the trees that are allowed to come in the gate to the garden that I can present to people as serious high-level bonsai.
Right.
And I was like, we get attached to our trees. They're our pets. They're our family.
Yeah.
We could have a tree that's very sentimental that we've had for 30 years, and it might not be a good tree, but we have a strong bond with that living object. And so when you start going down the quality road, you start having to make a lot of very tough decisions. I had to make those myself. I have a lot of clients who have gone through this process to where they really do want high level, and so we have to answer a lot of these questions about, does this tree really make the cut?
Yep.
I will say sentimental value does shift. Once you get, if you have a mediocre chochibai and then you get a really good chochibai, your sentimental value does shift to the good tree.
I have noticed that too. I'm not as, I don't know how much longer that Deshojo is going to hang out, because the graft is really ugly or something, or maybe I won't airlay it or something like that.
But if you just got a baller Japanese, Desojo, Japanese maple, right next to it, then your sentimental value is going to shift.
Yeah, now I have a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do think in those terms myself.
And if you are trying to pare down a collection, that's actually a really good way to downsize is don't sell your Desojo until the new one is sitting on the bench right next to it.
No jumping off of the lily pad unless you have another one lined up.
Exactly.
Yeah, like moving between jobs. You know?
But material selection is one of the biggest, I think, variables in this to start with. Because, like we said, I can give you a Japanese maple seedling, you can make the best quality tree. The older that seedling gets, the more its quality might be hindered by decisions that have been made in the past.
Well, that's the interesting thing. So going back to the inspiration being a Reddit question.
Yeah.
A lot of people, and this is also related a little bit to the time travel thing and everything else, which is it sure sucks that, you say you could start from a seedling, but what if I got that seedling in year one when I didn't know what I was doing, and then my first 4 years of bonsai baked in bad decisions into this thing.
You know, a lot of growers
And now
talk
I'm stuck
about
with that.
A lot of growers talk about this. I was talking to a grower up in Seattle. His name's Richard Green, and Richard told me, he's like, I've been growing trees for 30 years. The seedlings, the air layers that I'm starting now are my best ones.
Yep. Yeah, so it's
because that's a tough thing, right?
That really, it kills me a little bit because you only live once, and you only have so much time.
Yeah.
And you know the amount of time it takes to do good things, and you also know simultaneously that you can do some incredible work starting from scratch.
Yeah. You can.
That's dangerous though,
Well,
because
and often if you have an older tree that's maybe not so great,
right.
You can often grow a new tree faster than it would take for you to fix the problems with the old tree.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at. I'm kind of like, could I now lap myself in the race? Knowing what I know now,
Yeah.
Can I go so much faster? Could I start from a seedling several years in, being on the end of this long skill building exercise of, pole vaulting out of beginner land into intermediate or whatever this is?
Yeah.
Could I start from that? Or should I actually always be looking higher and going, maybe it's not worth it to grow a seedling because there's so many people around now, maybe not wherever you are, listener, but generally in the US and some other places in the world, there are people who are growing some pretty amazing trunks.
There are.
And so
finding a good trunk isn't that hard. I always tell students, grow what you can't find or buy.
Yeah.
Like, don't grow a ponderosa pine from scratch when you can go to Randy Knight and get even a mediocre tree for a pretty reasonable price. So
choosing your battles with material is important.
Yeah, and material selection. I just want to say one more time. This is so for operating at the higher you go, the higher your aspirations are, the more important material selection is.
The more the material itself is. The tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, let's look at really good high-end restaurants. 1, 2, 3 Michelin star restaurants.
Right.
Most of these restaurants have their own farms that supply the ingredients. Chris Bianco, arguably one of the best pizza chefs in the world, says if you put crap in a pizza oven, crap's going to come out of the pizza.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. If you have that. Sliced tomato from Subway that's just so bland that it tastes like nothing versus the best tomato that you just picked off the vine that you grew yourself that's fresh and it's an heirloom variety and blah, blah, blah. There's no taste comparison, right? The same is true for a garden like this. What we're doing this conversation is if you're going at the highest level, you need the highest possible ingredients. Now, you could grow them yourself.
You could.
But
that'd be taking a long ass time.
That would take a long time. So if you can sacrifice, time for, getting something, buying, a big chunk of that time to begin with, getting an old tree that you're getting the second, third generation of.
Yeah. Is there any value to a beginner going through a quote unquote grower phase?
I think beginners need to figure out basic horticulture, how to keep a tree alive.
Yeah. That's probably one of the greatest values it's been for me.
Yeah.
Because you're doing horticulture very wrong at the beginning.
And do that with Home Depot stuff. Do that with $20, $30 stuff that, that can die and it's not, a
potting
huge
soil can teach you a lot about how to do bonsai wrong.
There is probably something too, if you bought a $3,000 tree for your first bonsai, you're probably a lot more invested to keep that thing alive.
I think so.
You might almost in a negative way, you might panic your way there.
Yeah, I think it's almost analogous to the other situation that you mentioned, which was the intending to put a tree in an exhibition.
Yeah.
When you know that's about to happen, you are doing everything you can to really clean that tree up and get it perfect and pot it really nicely and oil the pot and everything. And so if you bought yourself a $3,000 ponderosa, you're probably
a lot more invested to keep that thing going, keep that thing alive, make sure you don't skip a watering,
Yeah.
So I do think you can learn that way, and I do have some students. There's a lot of people these days coming into bonsai that are, not coming in with Home Depot trees. They're coming in buying very expensive trees.
Yeah, or they're collecting.
Yeah. But learn, once you learn basic horticulture, once you can keep a tree alive, that's when you should start defining your quality goals, I think.
Yeah. It just comes to mind suddenly that often on Reddit what I see is I see somebody getting their very, very, very first piece of bonsai material usually a mulsi, and immediately giving it a name. And in my head, I'm just like, oh, don't do that.
Anthropomorphizing bonsai.
Don't be doing that. You know, and I want to say they're cattle, not pets, but they're not even really cattle yet, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, you give pets names, you don't really give cattle names.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the grower part of me saying that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think growing is important, but you can definitely have a great bonsai collection without doing very much growing. And in fact, we have a big chunk of the bonsai community who only really likes growing. Like they like doing the early stages of the work, the basic initial design, and then they get kind of bored when it comes to the maintenance work.
Yeah, and if you're out there growing stuff for all of us, or all the rest of us, thank you, and please continue doing that.
Yeah, we need more bonsai growers.
Yeah.
Because we have more bonsai consumers than we do bonsai supply right now.
So that actually leads to another thing, which maybe it would be good to talk about, which is growing a separate hobby?
Ooh, good question. Is growing a separate hobby?
Yeah, is there a defined boundary line between bonsai and field growing black pines or whatever? Or is it a blurry line? Is it a distinct line? Is it a separate thing?
I think it is in a way.
Does one, actually even better, does one take away from the other over time?
I don't think one takes away, but I do think you can think of things very separately. And a lot of the issues with bonsai education in North America is that people are learning maintenance techniques and applying those to growing, and it doesn't necessarily work backwards that way.
Right.
You can take a really high-end tree and redevelop or regrow a part of it and take the growing knowledge kind of in the late stage, but you can't take the late stage stuff and necessarily always apply it in the early stage.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to reset really elder trees, although sometimes we've thought about it here in resetting elder trees, but generally, you wouldn't.
Yeah, because bonsai, when we think of it sustainably and over a long period of time, bonsai is an art of compaction. Right? A tree is going to reach an eventual size to where it looks good. For the silhouette looks good in proportion to the trunk size, and once you start getting too much past that, then you're always recompacting it to where it looks good. So bonsai is never kind of stagnant. It's always in flux, and that's one of the important things about an exhibit is you're seeing things at the top of that flux. You're at the top of that curve where it just looks the most absolute fantastic.
Yeah, I like that you say it's the top of the curve because it does seem like trees peak when they get to shows.
They do.
And then what most people don't seem to know is that they kind of
the very first thing that
they're post-peak after the show, and they have to kind of go through a recovery and a change after that.
My favorite thing to do after an exhibit is bring the tree home and say, okay, how can I make this 5% better? Do I put it in a grow box? I take the tree out of this, very expensive antique Chinese pot, put it in a $4 Home Depot constructed grow box, and say, how do I make this 5% better? What do I not like? We celebrate it in the exhibit. What do I not like? What can be improved? And
so that's all at the end of that long journey of development, material selection, everything else. What about the beginning of all that? What's interesting is, we can say to beginners or people who are just getting into it, and they can tell that I'm gonna try to get really really far in this. This is something I really want to focus on.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my train of thought.
I mean, let's go back to growers. Like you mentioned, do growers? My whole thing that I always wonder is growers don't always make bonsai. Now, like if you come to a garden like this, if I have a seedling, it's got to turn into something really fast. This is not a nursery. This is a bonsai garden.
Yeah, you gotta be on a path to a show in about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and it's not that we don't do growing here. I mean, you and I just did a YouTube video today on slit potting a white chochabai. For those watching on RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai channel on YouTube, we have this tree here with us for the conversation. This is a tree that I essentially grew. It was a nursery stock tree. I cut it back to 1-inch stubs, and I totally regrew it. But it was in the context of this wasn't always going to exist as a never-ending pre-bonsai.
Yep.
We had a mission, and we were working to achieve it.
You knew you could do that, though. And that
Not when I started. When I started this.
Oh, actually, yeah, right. You had this for a while.
I was in high school.
Right. Well, that is the perfect analogy for the beginner situation, right? Where
yeah. But I was working with someone, Michael Hagedorn, who said, Andrew, you don't know the roadmap for Chochibai, but I do. I'll help you get there.
Yeah.
Here's step 1.
Yep.
And all I had to really learn was step 1 and step 2, because step 3 is irrelevant until you've completed step 2.
Yeah, like Jonas always says, when you have a 1-year-old tree, all you need to know is how to grow a 2-year-old tree. Yeah. Right. And so that kind of links to this whole other thing, which is, we got material selection, but like on day 1, someone's asking, or on week 1, someone's asking, okay, give me like the roadmap for getting good at bonsai. Okay, I got material selection down. I know that's really important, but a lot of material immediately, the moment you have it, implies your next steps, like depending on what kind of material you got.
Yeah. How to get good at bonsai? Here's another huge thing along with material selection is grow things that grow well where you live.
Yep.
If you live in Texas and you're trying to grow Japanese maples, you are trying to get that thing to survive. It has no chance of thriving. If you now, if you have a ficus in Texas, that might do incredibly well, better than how it might do here in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, and there's some like super mutant dwarf Alberta spruces that seem to be able to be in like hot parking lots and stuff like that for some reason.
Yeah, but grow something that's going to thrive where you live. That's like step 1 to success. Like, don't try and fight a losing battle.
Yep.
And I see that time and time again.
Yeah, even within a species, there's that whole thing where domesticated cultivars or things that have been quote unquote selected by the industry tend to be incredibly strong.
Yeah, like
it depends on the species, but some conifers, for example, you'll find a proven.
I mean, there's a reason that, like, when you open a kokofu book, you see a very limited number of species over the thousands and thousands of plants that they have in Japan.
Because they respond well. Yeah.
They responded well to a large number of people over a large period of time.
And that's the test of time, right?
Yeah.
Not like, oh, they spent a lot of time growing one tree, but I mean like hurling themselves against that technical wall over and over again and finding, hey, this one keeps giving us results. Let's go with this one.
And that leads to, I think, point number 3. We talked about material selection. We talked about choosing a tree that's going to grow well for you. Number 3, choose a tree that there's a lot of information out there. Don't do something new. If you're starting at bonsai and you're trying to get good, copy, don't invent.
To get good, you're not required to climb Mount Everest on day 1.
No.
It actually is a really smooth journey the whole way through, even if you're working hard.
Yeah.
From day to day, the lessons are learnable, the challenges are solvable, right?
Yeah.
It's never like this huge leap of intellect that you have to make on any given day.
Right.
All the techniques that I've learned here are very learnable, especially in person.
Yeah, and that's why we do bonsai education primarily in person. But
that's kind of getting back to you don't really need innate super talent. You don't need to be a Chinese calligraphy wizard.
No.
You don't need to have the mustard seed painting manual necessarily.
But if you're just starting out, don't do something new. Don't use a species that's never really been used before for bonsai. Don't try and make a style that's never been done before. If you are new at bonsai, be a copyist. Copy. Find someone whose work you really like and appreciate, and just try and copy what they do.
So this is a great point, because something that comes up online quite a bit when I give advice is I'm often trying to figure out a way to give the person a foothold into the sort of legitimate bonsai world.
Yeah.
As opposed to sort of the misinformation kind of shopping experience where you don't really get a lot of information, it's all kind of gardening crap or whatever.
Yeah.
But giving them that initial foothold where they have some legitimate connection to other people, good sources, and something that'll immediately work for them and give them immediate results within that season possibly. Where they can see it and now they're convinced that things will work out, and now there's no way they're going to drop out, right? And I think it's really the dropout rate that's kind of
dropout rate is
tricky.
Do you think the dropout rate is high in bonsai?
I think if you were to take the whole number of people that try it, probably. Okay. But the number of people that try to become serious, I bet that dropout rate is not too bad. It's just a question of, for me at least, how quickly am I getting serious in a good way? Am I wasting time? I'm really worried about wasting time in bonsai.
Yeah,
just grinding away
time
years.
is limited. It can take a decade or 2 or 3 to make,
Yeah.
a prize-winning tree from scratch.
It's not only that. It's not only that time is limited, but also when you get connected to people who really know what they're doing, and they're working with material, like you said, that's available in their area, it works well in their climate, it's well documented, they have other people that they're working with that are mentoring them on that species, they can move so fast from year to year. Yeah. And it's interesting how often I come up against across the impression that bonsai is slow, bonsai is waiting. Yeah. That must take forever. That must not be an interesting hobby. Or it must be really zen, like waiting around and meditating while it's like, no, it's not that. It's bonsai is action, right? Yeah. There's a lot of activity in there.
There's a lot of activity.
And mainly the thing is, when you have the skills and you hit those swings at the exact right moment every year, you can develop trees very quickly, especially if they're meeting those criteria for a good material that you mentioned.
Yeah. The more of those boxes you check, the better you're going to be at bonsai. So
maybe the insight here is that if you do choose material that's highly appropriate for your region and for where you're at in bonsai and where other people are at in your region, your learning opportunities to then give you that intellectual foothold to program bonsai into your mind and body will happen that much quicker.
I think so. Yeah. I think it happens a lot quicker. And that's how you can really amplify your rate of learning.
It's a good thing that I found somebody willing to teach me cottonwood.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm teaching you cottonwood or I'm helping you learn it, and I'm learning it along the way.
Right, with inspirations from other
lots of different
similar
species
riparian species, other poplars, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings up maybe another point: is bonsai is a systems game.
Yes, definitely.
The success that I have here at RAKUYO, the prize-winning trees that we create. You can't just take one thing of my system, one little facet, and expect to have the diamond at the end. The soils that we use, the water that comes out of our tap, the timing in which we apply the
everything
water,
fits together.
The fertilizer, the shade cloth, the climate, the way the trees are pruned, everything, winter protection. It all fits together.
It's really hard.
The soil components, if you want to.
It's really hard for me to type out a response to somebody online. Without accidentally barfing out the entire encyclopedia of everything I know, because it's so hard not to also mention the other thing that's important. If you're doing that, then you also should be doing this, then you also should be doing this, and assuming this, then you'll get a good result with black pine. It's good to find a good source and a good teacher and learn their system. I mean, this has been said many times.
Well, and that's why learning bonsai in person, your rate of growth will be so much more than if you're trying to do it solely by videos or podcasts or even online education. Like I have students who come into the intensive classes here. They can watch a video from some other bonsai professional and learn 100% of the information, but fail 100% in the application.
Yeah, I am that person. That happened to me. I was watching the thousands of hours of video that are out there, and paying a pretty good amount of money for it too. It costs more than Netflix, and it's really good stuff, and it's useful, but it's kind of like reading a manual about a car.
You would never want your surgeon to take an online course
and my first day at Michael Hagedorn's, it felt like I had learned more in that weekend, those 3 days, than I had in the previous 3 years.
Because you're living in that system. You're not just seeing a video about one specific topic. You are in that garden, in that environment. You're seeing the soil. You're seeing how the trees are watered. You're seeing the work that's being done that time of year. You're living within that system.
Yeah, it's weird. It dropped kind of an anchor for me, where suddenly I was validating things that were only just suspicions and theories before. Like I could see people really doing it. Yes, you are allowed to do that. Yes, you are allowed to clean the soil top in the middle of the summer if you want to and get all the moss off. Yes, you are allowed to defoliate a maple if these conditions are in place. Or yes, you're allowed to bare root a pine if you can do this and that. There's a lot of things that I wasn't sure. Actually, destubifying. That's a good one, right? Where we have the V shoot, and in the middle, between the V, we have the third thing that we cut off, the middle thing that we cut.
The branch that we cut last year that we had to leave just a small portion of to prevent some dieback.
And that little stub, it's like, what happens to that stub? When you're a beginner, you don't know. Do people cut this off? Do I need to leave it there because it might be needed in healing, that little junction or something? Or does it fall off on its own? And
It turns out you can just watch a comical YouTube video on my channel and find out.
Being given permission to do things by other hobbyists who are in your area, studying the same trees that you are selecting from material, it grounds you very quickly. And again, if you want to get good, you have to get past all of those initial speed bumps as fast as possible, because you could get stuck in them for years. That's the other problem, right? For a really long time.
I mean, there's a saying in bonsai, you could have 30 years, or you can have 1 year of experience 30 times.
Right.
You could have done bonsai for 30 years, but not know as much as this new club member in this Reddit scenario where someone comes in, he's 5 years in, and he's got the best trees in the club. He's, what's going on? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it material selection? What's the issue?
I mean, it may be some nature to it in the sense that some people are just really good self-learners or autodidacts. They just know how to make a lesson plan for themselves. They have a really good nose for figuring out who really knows their stuff in a scene.
Right.
How to even break into a hobby scene and discover all the documentation, find the subreddit for it, find the local clubs. Know who sells the good stuff online and who sells the crap. Who's just, selling mall site, who's selling good stuff. There's a bit of literacy in it too.
There is, and you do have to expose yourself a lot. Bonsai is like, if you're drinking wine, and you want to learn more about wine, you have to develop your palate. How do you learn more? You expose yourself to a lot. If you want to learn about Chardonnay, you have to drink a lot of different types of Chardonnay to start building your palate. Maybe if you want to learn even faster, get a wine teacher and do a tasting, in person with that, sommelier, that teacher, and taste 6 different types of Chardonnay and talk about the different notes and start building that palate. Bonsai is the aesthetics have evolved by a community over a long period of time. If you want to learn those aesthetics, you can. There's a good wealth of tradition to where you can learn a lot of that stuff. But you have to start exposing yourself to more and more and more. If you want to know what is a good Japanese maple, you have to know 500, 1,000, 10,000 Japanese maples. You have to see them to start to build that kind of database of what's good.
For Shohin conifers, I like to flip through Instagram, and I have a huge list. And if you want to find me and ask for this list, I can give it to you. I have a huge list of Japanese Shohin bonsai artist accounts that I follow. And it's just a flip book. And every day I make sure to go through the whole thing and save anything that, I'm trying to meet.
You're trying to build that palette.
I'm trying to build that palette. I'm trying to be able to, I know it when I can see it, but can I reproduce it? It's like when you're learning a language, you can hear it better than you can speak it for a while, and then when you can speak it, it just changes everything for you, right? So I'm kind of on the edge of where I would want to be with things like canopy design or getting the line right and things like that.
Well, one of the tough things about bonsai is, if we look at bonsai, 95% of bonsai is horticulture. Just keeping this thing alive, watering it, fertilizing it, growing it, making sure it has good placement in the yard, good sun exposure. The 5% that is the art part of bonsai is like 99% of the interest for people is what this thing actually ends up looking like, right?
So related to that, I was at a seasonal class at Michael Hagedorn's this year, and I spent 16 hours putting wire on a limber pine. And at the end of that 16 hours, he set up a tripod, a camera, and then he styled the tree in about 25 minutes. So, there's your 5%, right?
The art is the bending of the wire, not the application.
But I was super proud because I got it done in 16 hours instead of what could have been 100 or 200 hours. And what would have taken me, it would have taken me 5 years before that, it would have taken me that long to do just one of the branches.
Well, that's why, you can listen to a podcast, you can watch a video, but when you were sitting down with a teacher, in person,
or a mentor of some kind,
you were learning at 100 miles an hour rather than 5 miles an hour.
Right.
You being in that environment. That's why the pathway is there for most artistic fields. Like if you want to be, a really good chef, start as a dishwasher in the French Laundry and work your way up. 90% of it's going to go past your head, right? It's just going to go right through you and past you. But the 5% that sticks, you're going to learn really fast that environment, that culture.
So the
that
analogy,
system.
it sounds like the analogy would be you should get connected to bonsai people and help them with their trees by whatever way you can. Is that a realistic goal?
I think there's a strong community aspect in bonsai that we can't ignore.
Actually, maybe I should rephrase that. Maybe it's not that it is a realistic goal or not, but maybe it's a necessary goal
I think it's a
for the
necessary
person
goal.
who wants to get good, and capital G good the way we've defined it, going to an exhibition.
Yeah.
Maybe regional or national, but
Yeah, I think connecting to a community is like one of the best things you can do. And it's one of the best things you can do to get more people into bonsai, to keep this game going for generations, is to
'Cause
be
they
in
want
a
you
bonsai
there.
club.
They want you
recruit
there.
new people.
Yeah.
They want you there. They are excited to. If you don't know anything, they are excited to teach you. They're excited to tell you about the species that they all can keep alive in their area. They're excited to tell you about the system.
and they need the help.
And they need the help. Yeah.
Because eventually you have too many branches to wire yourself in a single weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like 16
and maybe
hours.
you want to
on
go
one
on
pine.
vacation and you need someone to help water your trees.
Yeah.
I mean, bonsai
That goes back to
definitely don't
continuity.
exist
Yeah.
without a single person, but I really think bonsai don't exist without a larger community. Because if your tree dies when you die, that's not necessarily a capital B bonsai for the world. It's more just a thing that you have in your backyard.
Right, right. It's interesting that you mentioned that, though, because some of the most superlative trees I've seen in Portland have come from hobbyists that are now no longer with us.
Yeah, I have.
That's crazy to me.
I have
It's
a lot of
amazing.
these trees here in the garden. Ann Spencer is a name that comes to mind.
She was not a
she's passed.
professional. She was a hobbyist. So
Yeah, she
anyone
just-
might be that person.
Everyone could be an Ann Spencer. Everyone could be a Bob Laws. I have a Shishi Gashira that I'm bringing to the Expo this year that Bob grafted 2 trees together that he bought at Sugawa Nursery in 1991, 32 years ago.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And yeah, it's crazy. I have lots of trees from people who started them that weren't bonsai professionals, but and that's another component of bonsai that we just can't ignore is the age component. If you want to get good at bonsai right away, you're not going to do it with seedlings and colanders.
Right.
You might be good at growing, but growing is not.
If you're a
bonsai.
teenager, you could probably do seedlings and colanders.
Yeah, because a bonsai is like a 401k, right?
Yeah.
The sooner you start investing, the sooner you start building that nest egg of that aesthetic nest egg. The better it's going to get.
Yeah.
But to your case that you made earlier, if you don't know what you're doing when you're a teenager starting growing, then it might all be for nothing.
That's true. That's true.
So you need to build a palette. You need to seek out a teacher or a club or a community that can help you.
You need to get situated as soon as possible so that you're not diverging away from where you should be skills-wise, where you should be actions-wise, decisions-wise on the material that you have, because it's a shame to waste material. And I'm saying that as somebody who will probably remove 90% of the material in my collection, probably more than that in the long run.
Yeah.
Especially if I want to get down to like 30 trees in the long run, right?
Yeah. Like for you, what are your quality goals? Like, what do you want? 30 prize contenders in the expo? Do you want 30 trees that just get into the expo? Do you care to have trees that are just BSOP club level kind of trees? What is your?
I think for me, I would like to have the skills to get trees into the expo, but the expo itself is not why I want to have those skills.
Yeah. It's
more that I have like a really strong fetish for the extremely dialed in appearance of really well done bonsai.
Yeah.
I almost feel like I'm drooling when I look through the Kokufu albums.
Yeah.
And I have an intense desire to just reproduce that.
Yeah.
And be able to do that thing. Maybe this is very personal. It's not as much of a collection thing for me.
But the
much
question,
as it is
how do you
being
get
able to
good at
play
bonsai,
that.
is something that's very much on your mind.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so
I
what
wanna
are
be able
things
to play
that you've
that
done in the
jazz.
last?
Yeah.
What have you done in the last 6 years to get good at bonsai?
Well, studying with Michael, studying with you.
Being in a very good garden and taking classes, learning from a teacher.
Yep.
Do you tend to stay on one system? Like, you're studying with both Michael and I, which
Very similar in some
very
ways.
similar. Michael was my teacher,
Yeah.
who I did an apprenticeship with. So you're in the kind of same bonsai family. Are you listening to other bonsai families? Are you listening to the Ryan camp? Are you listening to the Peter T camp? Like, do you take information from them and splice those into your practice?
I have a little bit. I would say Ryan has been the biggest influence on me in terms of before Michael and before you, in terms of horticulture.
Yeah.
I didn't learn nearly as much about the things that inevitably came out of my body, out of touching the tree. If I have to touch the tree, that's something I learned after Ryan.
Yeah.
But Ryan put a lot of interesting ideas in my head about asymmetry and the age of trees and horticulture and things like that. So there's always something to learn from everybody, but when it came to actually
It seems like
being in
now
front
you're
of the
like
tree-
dedicated to a system.
Yeah, I think I'm dedicated to a system. And I trust in that system. I no longer sort of like
You have
wiggle
faith in the
around.
system,
Yeah, I have
yeah.
faith in that system, yeah.
Yeah.
I see that it works.
You see the results.
Yeah.
And you see, like, with my trees, you've tracked, you haven't seen the whole evolution of this chochibai, but you've tracked the whole evolution of a trident that I have out there.
Yeah. There's a few trees here that are like that, where I have image galleries going back years. And that also has helped a lot for me.
Yeah.
Just seeing what is possible from one starting point to another.
Yeah.
So, look at a lot of progression photos of people that do
Progression
good work.
photos are really important. That's one way you can get good at bonsai really fast is seeing the end game. There's strategy to bonsai. Bonsai has a start and a finish, and there's lots of different roadways and pathways to get there.
You could take 40 weeks to get to the other side of the U.S., or you could take 40 hours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's lots of different
Yeah.
mechanisms, and bonsai is like that. And when I'm looking at a bonsai, I'm seeing what it is now, and I'm seeing what it could be, and I'm seeing step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. It's a chess player who's thinking multiple moves ahead.
Right.
Whereas I feel like a lot of people, and before I learned this was one of the hardest things to put together, is you're playing checkers instead of chess. You're just thinking about your next move.
It's interesting because some material work or some useful bonsai work that I've learned in this family of bonsai that I'm in now, through Michael, for example, is kind of iterative through a bonsai fog, in that you're taking juniper material in his garden, you're making gins, you're updating shari, but you're not really setting a super specific goal yet. You're just generating materials. So there does seem to be a subclass of bonsai that does go that way, but it's not like that at this level.
Yeah, you don't always have to see the end game. Like the chochibai that we have here with us that we just did the recent video on, that tree, for just several years, I was just putting good information into it. I was just, getting in good movement and good taper without really knowing how it would end up.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say we add information? I think our teacher Michael says this sometimes. Right?
Yeah. Michael put that verbiage into my head. Adding good information, like I just said, it's good taper, good movement, setting your tree up for good decisions later. I don't know how this branch is going to work in the overall design, but if it has really good movement and taper, then I can use a guy wire or wrapped wire to figure it out later.
Right. So actually, this is a good way to maybe go back to that first year of bonsai, or that first 5 years of bonsai, trying to figure out what to do with that material and where to go with it.
Yeah.
I guess if I have a bunch of junipers that are in 5-gallon pots and have a pretty good girth and have lots of random branches, I know from the adding information exercise that, hey, if it's wireable, I need to wire it. If it's long, strong, and boring, I need to turn it into exciting at least.
You
right?
do.
Because I'm going to be shortening it one day.
If you're building a juniper, you won't have a front the first 10 years. You don't really have, any clue if it's going to be a cascade or a upright. You're just putting in good twists, putting in good interesting bends, and even if that becomes a piece of deadwood later, most good junipers, they're 90% dead, 10% alive.
Right.
We still want deadwood to have good movement and taper.
Right. But I guess the idea is we're trusting in the process.
Trust in the process to a degree.
That's
and
what
find a process
information
that
is.
actually yields results. There are a lot of processes that don't yield results.
Like resetting to the same place every year with a big, huge cut.
Yeah, there's a lot of conifer artists who, every time they style a tree, it always looks like a first styling.
Right.
It never progresses over time. It just kind of stays.
So would you say that the adding information approach
I think that applies more to building.
It's
more
right?
growing, more building.
Okay.
If you have a...
But the opposite of resetting a tree every time you style it is to just add information and to kind of iteratively build upon what was there before. You're always standing on the shoulders of giants.
That's right.
You may be your own giant.
Yeah, building off motifs. If you go collect a really interesting cottonwood from the Cascades,
Yep.
If the tree's really curvy and twisty and whatnot, then the young branches that you're going to wire should be curvy and twisty and fun. If you have a ramrod straight trunk, then maybe don't put super squiggly, crazy branches in. You're building off the information that was built in by either another individual or, in that case, nature.
Right. So when we're adding information to a tree, we have to take into account what information's already there.
Yeah, we want to build off motifs that are already existing.
We're influenced by sometimes in the beginner's thread, you'll see people asking, how do I turn this into a cascade? And it'll be a stick, like a straight willow stick, and it's something you have to explain. Like, okay, there's transitions that you can make from certain types of material. There's some transitions that are just unthinkable or require too big of a reset. So this is the kind of stuff everyone needs to get orientated with right away in that first year. This is a really difficult game if your goal is to get very good as fast as possible.
It is. It can be. But if you live near a really good teacher, and sometimes even these days, I'm sure it's hard to even figure out who a good teacher is.
Right. So how do you do that?
How do you do that?
How?
Look, bonsai is a community, right? So look who's distinguished in the community. Not just for who has the biggest microphone, but who's actually winning awards in shows. What professional is either winning awards with their own trees or with client trees? Look at progressions, look at before and afters, figure out, are trees actually getting better under certain individuals?
Do you know what I found was a really eye-opening way to, and this is under the banner of getting good at bonsai, I think you have to get good at identifying beautiful trees and not beautiful trees, or trees that are technically good and trees that are not as technically good. And one of the best ways I've ever experienced of doing that was here at this garden.
Was it our Kokufu games?
Yeah, it was the Kokufu games. So we take a few Kokufu albums. You say to us students, I want you to find all the beaches in all of the Kokufu albums that are on the kitchen table right now. Yeah. And we busily go through and make markers on the pages. Every student has a book.
They look at their book. They find a beach.
Yeah.
We line up all of those books together with the beaches.
Knowing nothing. If it was your day zero, day number one of ever.
You can learn from that exercise.
You might be this must be the very first time you've ever seen a bonsai garden. You came to that seasonal that weekend here at this garden, and you did that exercise in the kitchen. Yeah. You walk away from that weekend knowing how to rate $1 million trees because you looked at trees that were nearly identical with each other, except for minor differences in the scissor work quality or any number of things. We looked at Nabari, at trunk line, everything. But anyone can immediately see when the trees are otherwise very similar because it is super high-end show. Yeah. Where they have maybe 5 beaches in one show that you can actually compare. And then that's a foothold into literacy of design, I think. Yeah,
and that specific example brings up so many of the things that we talked about. It brings up one species. If you want to get good at bonsai, study just a limited number of species. Don't have 50 different species. Study black pines, Japanese maples, and chochibai. If you just focus in on those 3, you'll get really good. If you want to learn what a good beech looks like, look at only beech, right next to each other, and you'll learn. If you want to see the differences between material selection, you might have one tree that has a lot of scars on it. Maybe it had a big reset done on it early on, versus another tree that was slowly grown kind of flawlessly. So in this specific example, you have material selection. You have help me out. You have
knowing what's
a lot of the things that we talked about kind of built into this.
Yeah. I think I was gonna ask you about that actually. Do you think that in that first year, once we do know what we should be growing in terms of a species or maybe 2 or 3 species, should we have 5 of each? Because for me, it was really useful.
Yes.
to know, is it normal for lodgepoles to lose their needles at this time of year?
I think one of the biggest
things like
mistakes
that.
people make, new beginners, people that are intermediate, one of the biggest mistakes people make is
Falling in love with every species at the nursery?
having a collection, having one of everything.
Right.
Don't have one black pine, one white pine, one red pine,
Right.
one Japanese maple, one trident maple, one red maple, have 10 Japanese maples, have 10 trident maples, have 10 chochibai, and you'll learn a lot having more of a fewer number of species. You just get more data points.
It's hard to even convey how valuable it is to have a bunch of the same thing.
Yeah.
In that first couple years, because you don't know what you're looking at first. You're completely tree blind for a while.
Yeah.
It's only
Yeah.
much later that you realize, like, oh, this is normal.
Yeah.
Because they all do it at the exact same time.
That's right.
And even healthy ones that I see growing full size in my neighborhood, they do the same thing.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, that's no big deal. That's not a growth or something weird. That's just what the tree does.
Yeah.
It's okay for this species.
Yeah. So Maciek, we've been talking for about an hour. Did we answer the question about what it takes to do bonsai well? How to do bonsai good, how to get better at bonsai?
Yeah, I don't know if we're ever going to fully answer that question, but I think we're just getting started.
We're definitely just getting started, and I think one of the exciting things that we're looking forward to is that there's going to be a lot more of these podcasts coming out. We're hoping to do about 2 a month to kind of get our podcast off the ground. You'll be able to find these both on the Bonsai Wire on an audio version and on my YouTube channel, RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai Podcast. But I think this format of having a bonsai professional, having a bonsai enthusiast who's really connected to a lot of beginners is going to be really fruitful.
I have a lot of questions to go.
Good. And I feel like you can probably say some things that I can't say as easily.
I can say some stuff. You might have to bleep me out sometimes.
We might have to bleep you out. And you can translate a lot because when you're doing this at a high level for a long period of time, you forget what it's like to become a beginner. Yeah,
you forget what the beginners don't know that don't even know.
Yeah. And so I think if you keep listening, we'll be able to help you out with that. So thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to the Deciduous Bonsai Podcast. I'm Andrew Robson. My co-host is Maciek, and we'll see you next time.